Welcome to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McClernand, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. Before we dive in, I want to let you know about two very important things. Number one, the stories shared here are often gritty, raw, and vulnerable, and very likely will include speaking about sensitive topics suited for a mature audience. Number two, this podcast is also broadcast live on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So on whatever platform you follow myself or Freedom Nutrition Coaching, you have the opportunity to participate in this discussion during the live stream. And we encourage your participation both by commenting and asking questions. And so this podcast is about exploring the stories that take place between the before and after photos, not just in the realm of weight loss, but in all areas of life. So let's dive in.
All right, welcome to another episode of Between the Before and After. This is actually a very impromptu episode that I wasn't planning on doing either, but I ended up in a great conversation with Addie here, and I was like, hey, you know what? We should just record an episode because you have a really great story, and we should tell that, and that's what this podcast is really about. So, Addie, I'm going to flip it right over to you and let you introduce yourself, a little bit who you are, what you do, and then we'll dive into how you got there.
For sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Addie Waqatabu. I know it's a,
it's a
mouthful, but I am currently in school at Elevated Learning Academy, where John was our guest this morning. We're very thankful to have him. I'm currently doing my diploma in applied science nutrition and love it. I reside here in Alberta in Blackball, but I'm originally from Fiji Islands. I'm an Indigenous Pacific Islander, and it's so good to be here. It's so refreshing to kind of do something out of the blue based on a great, insightful conversation. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So you grew up in Fiji, and I think the first question that's going to come to people's minds is like when we think about Fiji, say here in Canada, we picture maybe what we see in the brochures, like this tropical paradise, this teal colored water, palm trees with fresh coconuts right off the tree, maybe some waterfalls, oases, that kind of thing. That's our idea of like it's a tropical paradise. And then you come to Canada, not just to Canada, but to Alberta, the province where we get winter that seemingly never ends. And that seems, but and you said you were about 10 years old when you came from Fiji to Canada. So I'm kind of curious about just kind of your experience growing up in Fiji and then how you got here. So, we have this idea that it's a tropical paradise. What was it like for you growing up, and how do you remember it?
Well, the idea is not far from the truth. Honestly and truthfully, I think Fiji is still very much a paradise. It's still, my whole heart is still in Fiji, and but there's so much more to it, especially coming from where I come from. I don't come from the city. I come from very rural areas of Fiji. So growing up, being born and raised into a village where everything is grown with your hands. We plant all of our own foods, we fish for our own foods, even our chickens. I mean, I remember as a child, we were constantly, getting the eggs from the chicken coop and all of that. And so I personally, this might be biased, but I think I got the best of both worlds to see what many people would dream of experiencing, especially in the Western society. And being a part of the Western society, I think has been incredible. I don't think I would do it any other way. A lot of us coming from Pacific Islands, we migrate over and we get to, participate in the Western society where things run very differently at different stages of life. But
well, so I remember when I visited Fiji, because my wife is from Australia, and so whenever we would fly back and forth between Canada and Australia, we try to stop over somewhere, and one of the places we stopped over was in Fiji. And we get there and stepping out of the airport, it's like a little bit of a shock, because it's tropical, it's humid, and it kind of hits you, and I'm like, oh, how do people breathe here? And we landed there in now, but I'm thinking you might think the same thing when you step out of the airport if it's like minus 30, right? Like, how do you breathe this air that freezes your lungs?
We got out of the plane December 17th, So
Oh
at
man.
nighttime too. So we came from literally plus 30 every single day of our lives, and we stepped out of the plane and it was minus 42 that day. Yeah.
Wow.
I
Yeah.
wish I was kidding, but we stepped out of the plane. My first thought, how do I get back on the plane? Like,
Yep.
someone put me back on the plane. This cannot be real. There's snow everywhere. First time seeing snow in my whole entire life. And I am just like, whew, you know?
What is this frozen stuff on the ground?
What is this? And why do I feel like an icicle? I don't even think I know what an icicle is, but why do I feel like I'm a human icicle right now? It was crazy. It was just a crazy, crazy experience. And now, almost 14 years later, I'm still asking myself, why do I feel like an icicle? What is going on?
Yeah, well, you know, it's funny because my wife, you know, being from Australia, but she married a Canadian, and so she's over here with me, and she still thinks like, why do we live in Alberta? you know, we could at least live in Vancouver Island or something, you know, at least where their winter is kind of mild. Why do we pick the place that seems to have like 8 months of like frigid winter? So,
oh my goodness, that's the first question I get asked a lot when I say I'm from Fiji. People are normally, what are you doing here? That's the first question I get asked.
Well, of course, because so for us who grew up in Canada, Fiji is a place we would go on vacation.
Definitely.
You know, it's exotic because it's such a departure from life here.
Yeah.
It's tropical. There's no snow there, and we think, well, this is where we'd like to go. Yeah. And you know, so then we think, why would you leave that behind if that's where you live and that's where you're indigenous to it, and so on. Which I'm sure there's a story behind that. But so you grew up growing like all of your food, rural village. Now, might be an ignorant question, but you know, with electricity, what sort of facilities did you have in rural Fiji at that time?
At that time, we had generators for electricity, so we didn't have access to it all the time. So a lot of times, as a child, you know, I was outside all the time. The only time we would really be inside is to, you know, watch rugby, as you know, Pacific Island. Rugby. We're huge into rugby. Or if there was DVDs that got brought home, but for the most part, we had very limited resources, I guess, when it came to things like that. But it was I would not do anything to change it. I think a lot of people can relate to this to this particular experience of growing up somewhere else where there was no social media, there was no, you know, constant phones and stuff. Our childhood was outside, and I honestly, I would not change it for the world.
There's a real appeal, and then here people are thinking like, maybe I just want to go have a homestead and grow food and like live off the grid. There is a real genuine appeal to that because
big time.
we thought like life, like with all this technological advancement, that somehow life would just be a paradise, and we're discovering feels a bit like a trap, and maybe this isn't everything that we were kind of sold that it was, and now I want to go back to something simple, and you got to grow up with that.
Yes. So there's a certain way that I think I would describe Canada as opposed to Fiji, and I always say that Canada, I think, is based on three things. One of them being competition, one of them being comfort, and the other one being convenience. And I think a lot of our lives are based around, in Western society, are based around those three things, as opposed to growing up on an island where those three things are not our priority. So our priority is, you know, values and family time and being connected to the land and what we eat, how we eat it, and how our ancestors have been eating it for many, many years. I think that's why I took such an interest in nutrition, is bringing what nutrition and what food meant to us back home and trying to bridge the dots in a Western society where that's not very prominent and that's not such a common thing to do. And so in my experience, even as a student, trying to have conversations and trying to bring awareness to what we're eating, why we're eating it, and what it does for us and our brains. And I just find it so interesting to have been able to see that world and to be living in this world and trying to connect the two.
To bring the best of both. What's kind of like some of your fondest memories when you think back to your childhood in Fiji? What are you picturing? And what do you miss about that?
Oh man, our tropical fruit. I'm telling you, when I was a kid,
Yeah.
my grandparents had this big land that they have been working on for decades. We had an avocado tree, a big avocado tree. And here, avocados are so expensive. I was always wondering, like, why is produce so
So expensive.
expensive? We have avocado trees, we have pineapples, we have watermelons, cocoa, even,
Yeah, cocoa beans.
all the cocoa beans that you can imagine. I mean, I ate fruit until I was sick,
Yeah.
My fondest memories, honestly, is being on my grandparents' land and having access to all of the free fruit that I could eat, fishing trips every weekend, and having just greens and chili peppers
Yeah.
and bananas and coconuts, just all of it right there, accessible right in front of me was.
Right, and you don't have to go to a grocery store and weigh it out and okay.
Out and cry about the prices when
Yeah.
yeah.
You think like we literally just grew this, and on fishing, you're going out in this beautiful, like often like teal colored water where you can see there's great clarity and whatnot. And what kind of fish were you commonly fishing for?
So I actually don't know what the English names are for them, to be honest.
What are the indigenous names for them?
One of them is like redfish. In Fijian it's called damu. So that's kind of the fish that we most often eat. There's so many different kinds of fish, and we have Fijian names for it, and we speak Fijian in the household. So I don't really know what the translation for it is, but fish every weekend. Fish is the cure to everything. I mean, seafood is the cure. Just, oh man, yeah.
Right, and so you must have. I mean, I imagine, anyways, that you played in the ocean a lot as well.
Oh man, all the time.
Yeah.
And our idea of a fun day out with your family is boating to a different island, and I think this is pretty common with people who come from those areas. Is we go to a different island, we bring food on a boat, and we stay there for the whole day to eat and just play volleyball and just be on a deserted island, basically, because only a third of Fiji is
populated.
The other 2/3 are totally free. We just have not, and that was
I mean, this sounds amazing. When we flew over to Fiji, it was in February, and I think there must have just been the rainy season. Yes. And so maybe this is one of the downsides potentially, but a lot of the roads had, and there must have been heavy rains. A lot of the roads had really taken a beating, and so of course we're getting into this sort of old beat up bus, and we're like, oh man, where are we going? And hitting, there's just potholes everywhere. And then we just get dropped off at this harbor somewhere. And it was kind of an industrial harbor because we were going to stay on a little island resort, and we were like excited about going to stay in I think it's what do you call it? The Mburo huts, I think, or
Mburu, yeah.
Mburo.
Very traditional, yeah.
Yeah. So we were excited about this. We're like, we want to at least pretend, or at least feel as though we got an actual experience of what it might be like, more traditionally. We wanted to experience that. And so we get greeted by this just hulking huge Fijian guy, and we're like, but this gentle giant, and I'm like, okay, because I'm 6'1", I'm 240, like I'm a big guy, and this guy made me look small. And I was like, and we get into this boat. I'm like, is this boat going to stay afloat with like the two of us? Him and me in this boat. We're going on this little boat across, and we're like, man, we don't even know. Like, we're just trusting that this guy is like taking us to somewhere we're supposed to go, not just some random like deserted island, And we got to this island resort, and of course we were greeted, and they gave us a drink and whatnot. And made us feel very at home. But because of the heavy rains, we couldn't actually stay in the actual like grass huts because there's a lot of mold and mildew. So like, sorry, we had to upgrade you to this one that has like air conditioning and stuff. And I was like, well, maybe I could, I could part with that little bit of it,
Yeah.
But then they had a kava ceremony.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, the classic kava ceremony. That's kind of our like traditional roots. I don't know how familiar everyone is with kava. Probably not at all, but
I'm not sure if we have it over here. I don't know if you've ever seen it here.
Yep, there are some Fijian shops that sell it around Yeah, in
Okay,
Edmonton,
very cool. Yeah.
and as well as Vancouver. They have lots of Fiji shops, so we do have it still because it's very important in our culture that we integrate that even now that we live in Canada. And a lot
Yeah.
of people overseas, like there's a lot of Fijians in the UK, there's a lot of Fijians in other places of the world.
Yeah, so now maybe it's one of their exports. But
Yeah.
kava has a bit of an effect when you consume it.
Does, yes. So kava kind of acts like a drug almost. It has a soothing effect. A lot of people use it pharmaceutically. So a lot of people, it helps with anxiety, with people who have sleeping problems. So this actually might be useful to some
Yeah.
to some viewers who might be having troubles with those things. So some of the most common ones are sleep. That was a big one. If you know any Fijians, we have no problems with sleeping, and I almost want to say it's because of kava, but I can't.
Yeah. Well, and
proven, so.
So there was actually three of us, no, there's four. Sorry, like four visitors on this island. So I think maybe because it'd been the tail end of the rainy season, there wasn't actually a lot of people. So we actually almost had this island to ourselves, other than the folks that lived and worked on this island. Yeah. And so then again, we're like, we're gonna drink this drink that like might knock us out. Or they're just gonna leave us on this island and like rob us and like like we don't want to offend them. So I guess we better have this drink. Like and my wife and I are fairly experienced travelers. Like we've been to 45 countries. We've traveled around the world,
wow,
and but this was like a really, like, obviously, because I'm now remembering, like, this was a unique and memorable experience that I was like everyone seems like so warm and friendly, but I'm like still slightly scared because I'm like they're all like hulking and huge.
Yeah. And why are they making you drink this muddy water like for fun?
They're gonna make me drink this drink that's gonna knock me out, and they're just gonna like rob me and leave me on the island here, and yeah. Anyways, we ended up just laughing the night away, just having like a great old time, staying up way too late, and not surprising. I wish I could remember the name of the gentleman that like taking us across in the boat, who's of course a gentle giant, and I'm sure I've got pictures of it somewhere. In fact, if I'll tag you in a photo on Facebook afterwards. But yeah, so that was like my experience with kava and it of course turned out to be a great experience. We loved our stay there. We had a great time, and then we went to one other place in Fiji, and I think it was like some Australian rugby team was staying there, like visiting, and so like, sorry, we had to upgrade you to this other suite over here because the rugby team took out this whole section of the hotel, and I was like. So literally, we went for like a traditional Fijian experience where we wanted to like, and we're getting upgraded into like this like king suite with a hot tub. Like, yeah. So, but it was a good time. So you're 10 years old when you came here. So what was the reason for coming? Like, what were your thoughts? Like when the idea, because obviously this didn't just come out of nowhere. Like there's this idea that we're going to go, and why Canada instead of say Australia where it's warm
and closer to home? Yeah. Yeah. So my parents actually had an opportunity to come work in 2008. And so they took that opportunity, and it took a long time for them to come around to that decision. But essentially they just wanted to provide a better education and and set up their children for success, I guess.
There's opportunities over here that the first world does offer that are more difficult to come by in a small country like Fiji.
Definitely. When they took that opportunity and we came to work. The thing about Fiji, it's paradise. It's amazing. We call it hidden paradise for a reason. However, our resources are very, very limited. A lot of people are very comfortable with what they have, and are happy with each other's presence and what we have already. However, there's not a lot of room for, I would say, growth or expansion. And so when we came here, we came with the intention of expanding our knowledge, of expanding our family all over the world, and sharing our culture with other people, and kind of getting to tell our own story. And it's been amazing ever since. And we are so lucky. I feel like I feel really lucky that we ended up in Alberta out of a lot of, as opposed to other places or other provinces. Maybe it's just because we don't really know anything else outside of Alberta.
Yeah. Well, like, were you nervous leaving? You know, because had you flown, like, I don't know if you traveled, had you been to, say, Australia, New Zealand, or any of the surrounding countries before, or was this like first time travel? You're hopping on a plane and like this is where you land.
First time traveling anywhere outside of where we, like, literally the first time I hadn't even been to the big city in Fiji. So
Oh man.
yeah, taking us from this rural, where we had literal generators. We had just moved to the city a couple of years prior, where we had running electricity all the time, plopping us out of this little and putting us in this big city where there's buildings everywhere, and it was very alarming, to be honest.
Yeah, we're gonna say that's like very shocking to the system, because it's such a departure. And of course, you came in the middle of winter and it's minus 42, so you get the Alberta warm welcome and whatnot. Now, growing up, did you learn to speak English like as a part of your education?
Yes, as part of our education, we were taught English, British English, because we were colonized, and so we were taught that type of English. Coming here and getting used to this type of English was a little bit hard to navigate, but eventually, and my mother was a teacher for 13 years back home, and so it was a great resource to teach us English so that we could,
So was she already fluent?
Yes.
Yeah.
We taught English in school, so she would teach us, and so we had kind of an upper hand coming.
Right.
Yeah, and being around predominantly, English-speaking people, which
right.
Go for.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, like in Alberta, like I'm not sure how large the sort of Pacific Islander community would be. Any idea?
It's really not very big. We actually had no contact with any other Indigenous Fijians or Pacific Islanders until like a decade later, and it was the most. Oh my goodness!
Well, mind expanding.
Astonishing thing to me. I could not wrap my head around it because I was so used to, being integrated into a whole new society and kind of following the ways and speaking and eating, Canadian food and all of that. I mean, we tried our best to preserve our culture. We still speak Fijian at home. We still cook Fijian food. But after 10 years and meeting another Fijian person, it was like a deer in the headlights,
Whoa, what is, I mean, I kind of really feel a little bit, although I haven't spent 10 years in a foreign country, but I remember, like, my wife and I lived in about 7 countries, and when it's a real challenge being a foreigner and that not being your native language, because I know, like, my brain would just get tired.
Yes.
Like speaking a second language or speaking a third language, it just gets tiring in the brain. So, but then I would meet someone, you hear English, and it's like, ding, I heard someone speaking English. I'm going right over there and talking to them because I'm going to give my brain a rest because I don't have to think about talking, But I love that your family really worked to preserve like the Fijian language. And so you're still fully fluent and comfortable. Does it still feel like your mother tongue, or is it like, do you feel like fluently bilingual? Where do you feel like you're at? Like,
yes, I feel like I'm still fluently bilingual. Not being around Fijian speaking people, kind of my formal speaking skills are not quite as sharp, but for just everyday language and stuff like that, it's still very fluent. It's just, if you ask me to speak in front of a large group of people, I might struggle here and there, but
right. Be like, hey, by the way, we're gathering together all the Fijians in Canada to bring you the symposium, and Addie, you're going to be the keynote speaker, and it's going to be conducted entirely in Fijian. How would that feel?
Like, yeah, about that.
Yeah.
And I'll be okay, but
yeah. So then, like Fiji is a small population. I wouldn't even know. I'm trying to think what the population might be. Would there even be 1 million people in the populace?
Nope, it's actually the same population as Edmonton. So we haven't even reached 1 million people yet. So
right. So you come to a city that has more people than the entire like country and whatnot. What was it like as a kid? Kind of getting like, as you said, you had a little bit of advantage because you did have some English language skills, but you kind of get you must have been a little bit of a novelty getting kind of plonked in this community, and you show up at school and it's like, hi, I came from a tropical paradise to this frozen winterland.
I spent a lot of time telling that story because it wasn't a story that people were used to hearing. we were kind of the only ones that were from this unknown place in the world. And people would ask, oh, like Fiji water. I'm like, well,
Yeah, there's more than that. But it's nice that you heard the name on the water bottle. Like, that's a start.
that's a good start, but there's a lot more than the water, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And no, it was interesting getting to tell our story coming out of a place where you identify with absolutely everyone and being plucked in a place where you identify with literally no one.
Yeah.
From everyone to no one, and just having your family to identify with was a big challenge. And I'm sure some viewers who have been through the same experience can kind of identify with me or relate to me in this way. It almost feels like imposter syndrome. I don't know if I would
Yeah.
really, you know?
Yeah. Do you have siblings?
I do, yes. I have 3 other siblings.
Okay. And where do you fit into that? Are you the oldest, youngest, somewhere in the middle?
I'm the second oldest. And
Okay.
so it's interesting how we turned out is us 2 older ones, we can speak the language and we can understand it fluently. The other 2, they were a little bit too young. They were 5 and 2 when we came, so they can understand it, the language, but they can no longer speak it. So
Okay.
I think that's a pretty common thing to see. I've seen is common to see in other families who come here kind of halfway through, halfway through making their families. But
Right.
yeah, that's been.
I mean, I guess you're kind of speaking for them a little bit. Would they like to sort of revitalize that? Is there a sense of wanting to, or because I mean, it can be hard to maintain a language when you just hear English all the time.
Oh yeah.
If you were speaking, if you're in Vancouver and speaking Mandarin, for example, or Cantonese, you'd probably be all right because there's a huge population there, speaking that. But then, like Fijian, is there anybody else in Edmonton speaking Fijian, other than your family, right? So
yeah. So my 2 younger siblings, they would love to, practice it more, but unfortunately, they spend the majority of their day around English-speaking people. So it's really hard for them. Even when we get home from school, it's only my parents and us, and so it's been difficult. They would love to be able to speak the language a little bit more, but unfortunately, they just don't have that.
maybe the bandwidth.
Yeah. I guess now at their age that they're at now, it's very difficult.
Yeah, because and you yourself, you've now lived in Canada for longer than you lived in Fiji. Have you been back to visit a few times?
So my parents and my other siblings go, but I'm usually unfortunately the responsible sibling who gets to stay home and take care of
Right.
everything while everyone goes back home and and does what we need to do. So we still go back for weddings or funerals or any of those big events. And my parents are getting older, so I kind of would rather have them go and do what they need to do while they're able to travel still.
Yes.
Whereas for me, I'm still in my early 20s, so I have a lot of room to be able to do that later and just let them.
Yeah. Would they ever want to go back and live there or retire there or finish their years there? Is there that thought or?
That's interesting. I actually just had this conversation with my parents and with my dad. I asked him, I was wondering, would you ever want to go and live there? And he said, I've already lived a majority of my life there. Now I've started a whole life here. I have grandchildren. I have a whole nother life here. So I don't feel the need to go back and live the same life I did before. Whereas me and my older brother, we still feel the desire to go back and we still have so many unanswered questions, and we would love to create a life there because we feel like we kind of missed out a little bit on that experience. So our generation, yes, we would love to go back and start a whole new life there. But as for our parents, they don't, interestingly enough. So yeah.
I mean, and wouldn't that be not really ironic, but just interesting that like your parents emigrate, away from Fiji and come to Canada to give you a better life, essentially, and then you end up going back because you're like, well, I want to experience more of the life there. Because
Right.
I mean, now of course we have modern technology, internet, all this kind of stuff, connectivity, and you can have a remote business.
Absolutely.
And if you were to be paid in a foreign currency, I imagine the conversion would be actually pretty good. So
Yes.
you could probably enjoy quite a good quality of life living in Fiji and having like a remote business.
Definitely. So I don't know if anyone who's watching is familiar with the Waka family. They are this gentleman from Vancouver. Him and his family. We're actually relatives. They have a big social media presence. So
Okay.
they lived in Vancouver. They had a business, and they just decided we're gonna pick up our lives, take our kids, and go back home to the village and start a business there. And they videoed the whole thing. Like they have all over social media, and they were able to go from Vancouver, the city, go all the way to Fiji, back in the village where I'm from.
Really?
Yeah, in the village where I'm from, and like literally plop themselves in the middle of the village where they got to live the village life. And they planted their own kava. They have their own land. And the thing about Fiji is if you're Fijian, if you're indigenous Fijian, you're actually entitled to land there. And so they just went, claimed the land, and it's so cool. If you ever get the chance, they're called the Waka family.
Totally check them out.
And they have 2 small children, and they're running around now. Now they've learned how to speak the language. So this blonde Caucasian child with blue eyes is speaking our language because he's been there for, and it's so interesting to see. And they're just getting used to how the village life works and how, the elders, just the most, oh man, yeah, we're relatives of theirs. So their grandparents, his grandmother is my grandmother's sibling. We come from the same village. And so, if you want to check them out on YouTube, I think it's so interesting. They're followed by a lot of people. So
well, I imagine they would be, because again, we have an idea that this would be some kind of paradise like living. I would like to I would like to be self-sufficient. I'd like to grow my food. I'd like to, if you think back, like what are some potential downsides? There's the economic downside, but I mean, just practical downsides of potentially going back and living in Fiji.
Government-wise, I think there's a big downside for maybe being supported by the government. We have had the same leader for a long time. And so going back there, things, there's not as good as healthcare because we are borderline third world country, kind of second world. So things like healthcare, things like accessible, affordable education, all of those things play a big role in the potential downsides of residing in Fiji. But I think it depends on what your personal values are and what you find important in the lifetime. Whereas, and so I think they valued more getting to connect to their roots and family and land and growing your own food. So they were able to be successful. But I think it just depends on how you're going at it personally. What's more important to you?
Yeah. Well, I guess the Waka family then has proved that you can go back there, and if they're quite popular in social media, like I said, it indicates there's demand for it. But then you can earn, I don't know, like on YouTube, maybe you earn ad revenue or something like that. And again, you can actually have a pretty good income.
Yes, they export stuff as well. Like their business is ran, so they're able to work remotely and they can export stuff. Like we have kava that has the Walker family. We've purchased it here, but then at the same time, we're watching their YouTube videos of them being back home from the village that we come from. So they are living proof that if you yourself were in a Western world and you all of a sudden decided one day, you know what, I'm going to live the island life. I'm going to go back and plant my own food and fish for my own. They are the perfect example of you can do that successfully and happily. So,
well, when I was thinking of downsides, I was like, for me, I burn really easily. So my tone is not that conducive to a sun-filled life as much as I imagine I would like it to be. I think about insects, or maybe large, like biting insects. Lots of them that can nibble on you. And so me, maybe again, not being exposed to them very often, I would probably react quite a bit differently to them in that situation. But, you know, ultimately I'm like, man, it is really tempting, that thought, I have to say.
Yes.
You know, it really is. And I think the appeal is the simplicity of it, being connected to land, eating more whole food, like really connection to community and to family, and back to our common shared humanity, which is, I think, where, you know, for as much as I love the digital age, I mean, look at this, we're doing a live broadcast podcast. This is amazing.
Right? We don't even have to be in the same city. Like, that's so cool.
Right. But there's still something, I think, maybe in the human spirit that we kind of long for that sort of connection as well. And so what's next for you then? So you're working your way through being a nutrition professional. You've said that you kind of want to work with the Pacific Islander community in particular. What makes you, I mean, obviously it's a part of your heritage. Heritage aside, that's very important, but what else makes you passionate about doing this?
Well, I think what I'm personally passionate about is trying to understand our relationship with food and where that comes from. As I don't know if this is common knowledge for everyone, I apologize, but you know, our childhood plays a big role in how we turn out as adults. And so the foods that you had access to when you were young, or the foods that you were exposed to when you were young, that's what, you know, that's kind of the base point of what you turn out to be older. And so coming from Fiji and having those whole foods, but also having limitations and not having the best relationship with food, even though we come from, you know, a place where food is widely provided, understanding what role nutrition has in our lives is not something that I find everybody knows or everybody has conversations about. So what I'm passionate about is bringing that conversation to the table and really taking a look, hey, you know, what is my relationship with food? How do I improve that? And how do I teach the generations to come to improve that relationship?
Right. And I love that. I love that the conversation around like seeing our connection to food is more than just something to consume. Thinking about it as like something to experience. So, you know, you think about maybe a traditional Fijian dish that you might enjoy. And if somebody serves that, maybe like, for example, do you have a favorite childhood dish that you eat back home in Fiji?
Yes. So my favorite Fijian dish is something called palusami. And it's basically like fish or tuna or like beef or whatever meat it is. It's wrapped up in taro leaves and cooked in the oven. Or we have this thing called lobo where we cook, I think they do it in the Hawaiian culture as well, but we cook food underground with hot stoves. I don't know if you got to experience that when you were in Fiji, but
I would love to now.
Yeah. So basically we dig up a big old hole in the ground, we stuff hot rocks and food that we wrap in tinfoil and let it cook in hot rocks for hours, and it just turns out this like earthy, very interesting food. Oh my goodness, there's nothing.
So do you dig holes in your backyard here in Canada? Like,
for reasons I don't know.
But you know what? Like that. What a cool. Like we're moving into summer, right? So how cool would that be actually to be like, hey neighbors, I'm doing this traditional like Fijian cooking here. That'd actually be really cool. I'd be so down for that. I'm like, yeah, I wanna dig a hole in the ground and cook with hot rocks. And
oh my goodness, it's the best. It's the best thing. We actually used to do it in the summer before COVID. We would dig a hole in the ground, put hot rocks, cover it up, cook it, and just invite our neighbors, our friends, our family to come eat, especially on Fiji Day. That's an activity that we did often, but obviously since the pandemic, we're not quite. The rules have changed. But it's called lobo. It's underground cooking, and honestly, I don't think there's anything like it. After you have food that's cooked under the ground, I don't know.
Yeah, there's just nothing that compares. There's a thought that when you eat that, it probably in your mind brings you back to your childhood.
Big time. Yes.
Brings you back, connection to my heritage, connection to my roots. And so, you know, food is never going to be just fuel. And in fact, I push back when people say food is just fuel. And I say, no, it is not. It is history. It is culture. It is family. Right? It's connection. It's socializing, celebration. There's so much to the sharing of resources that can think about you inviting your neighbors around being like, hey, we're making this amazing food. who doesn't like? You must be the most popular people in the neighborhood. They're like, yeah, like what an amazing experience to like share your culture like that.
Yes, honestly, it's it just that's kind of my whole drive in what I do and what I aim to do professionally is making sure that people understand, or not making sure, just helping people understand that food is so much more than just what we consume. It's so much more than what we eat just for energy. I mean, our genetic makeup, a big portion of it is the food, and the food that your grandparents ate and the food that your great grandparents ate.
Right.
And so making sure that we understand generationally that it not only affects you, it's going to affect your child, it's going to affect your grandchild, it's going to affect bloodlines. And so trying to be cautious and trying to teach people who want to be taught, obviously,
and we want to create conversations like this that are intriguing, so people are like, I do want to know more about this, because I think how many people have thought about the food that I'm eating. If I have children and they have children, the food that I'm eating potentially influences the genetics of my grandchildren. That's kind of a scary thought when I think about it. I'm like, oh my gosh.
It's not an easy conversation to have, and it's sometimes it takes you like, oh my goodness, you're right. It's not an easy and not the most comfortable conversation to have, but I think it's very important that we all for sure.
Yeah. Well, Addie, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you. You're a real delight, and I'm loving your story. I definitely want to have some food cooked underground. So next time that's happening, send me an email. Let me know.
The invite is already extended, so feel free to go and have some lovo and have some grog. We do that as well. So
okay. Maybe we'll have some kava.
Yes, some kava. We drink it out of coconut bowl, so I'm excited.
Awesome. Yeah. So if people wanted to find you, is there a way that they can connect with you?
Yes, I do have a personal Facebook page. I'm not very active on there, but if you would like to reach out, then more than welcome to. I think my email will also be
I'll make sure I put that in the show notes as well. So
my email will be extended. So if you have any questions about Pacific Islanders or anything at all, please feel free. I'm here. I'm a resource. I'm learning. This our whole lives is just basically learning, and I'm a student in all things. So please feel free to share.
Well, and you have lots of wisdom to share. So if I got asked this question today, so I'm going to pose this one to you because I really loved it. It was like, if you could write something on a billboard, what would you write, and where would you put it?
Okay, so this was a tough one, and I wasn't actually expecting to answer this today. But I think if there was anything that I would emphasize in anybody's life, is to just be true. Just speak your truth. I don't find that there's success in trying hard to be somebody that you're not. So, be authentically yourself. People will love you for it. People will see you. And yeah, I don't know. Just be yourself.
I love that.
I know that's very cliche, but it holds a lot of meaning.
There's a reason why we have cliches, because there's value in them. So, well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and look forward to seeing what you do in the future.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe, or leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become. And I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you, because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.
Anyone can come from any place of brokenness and destitution and build an amazing life.